Well, good evening from London, and thank you very much for joining me for this talk in the Lockdown University series on heroes and villains. Eli Cohen, Eliyahu ben Shaul Cohen, better known as Eli Cohen, Israel's master spy. He penetrated the highest echelons of the Syrian regime. He was almost named Deputy Defense Minister, and he was publicly hanged in Damascus in 1965, aged only 41. I think it's fitting for me to be talking about Eli Cohen today, as this November is Mizrahi Heritage Month. It has been designated a time to mark the exodus of 850,000 Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. Most of these refugees, like Eli Cohen's family, were absorbed by Israel. Eli Cohen was born in Alexandria in Egypt. His father had moved there in 1914 from Aleppo in Syria. Quite a number of Syrian Jews moved to Egypt after the Suez Canal opened in 1869 as their sources of income dried up. Eli Cohen's family was lower middle class. He had a good education and spoke Arabic, English, and French. This would later make him an attractive recruit for Israeli intelligence. At the onset of the Jewish exodus from the Muslim world, Cohen's parents and three brothers fled to Israel in 1949, but Eli stayed behind. Like many Syrian Jews, or Jews of Syrian origin, he was a pious man. Cohen had planned to become a rabbi with guidance from Moise Ventura, Alexandria's chief rabbi, but the city's yeshiva soon closed down. Not being able to afford to buy himself out of the Egyptian army, he enlisted in 1947, but was kicked out as his loyalty was questioned. He then decided to pursue a degree in electronics at Cairo University, but he dropped out because of harassment by the Muslim Brotherhood. So 2 films introduced his story to a Western audience. The Impossible Spy came out in 1987. It starred John Shea and Eli Wallach. The Spy was a mini-series made in 2019 for Netflix. It starred the comedian Sacha Baron Cohen in a serious role. So these 2 films made Eli Cohen famous, but how true are they to Eli's story? For instance, they claim that the Mossad first approached Eli in 1960, offering for him to work for them for a fat salary. He is shown to be rejecting the offer until he was fired from his job as an accountant. Recently married with a baby on the way, the film implied that he took the Mossad job because he needed the money. But this version of events ignores the fact that Eli Cohen was involved with the Zionist underground when he lived in Egypt and had even applied to work for Mossad. So before we talk about that phase in his life, I want to show you a clip from The Spy, the Netflix series.
Do you consider yourself a patriot?
I love this country with all my might. Welcome to Syria.
If your country needed you to lie to your friends, your family, your wife, would you do it?
I will be a...
Sorry.
If your country asked you to risk your life, would you do it?
This is the opportunity for me to give you the life that I promised you, Daddy. My name is Kamel Amin Thabit.
The Sheikh is your only way in. Please join me.
You've made a nice life for yourself here in Damascus.
When you walk into a room, everyone wants a piece of you.
Come in. Enjoy.
You can trust me with your life. I hope I can do the same. We all have secrets.
This is not a game, Kamel. You are either him or you are dead.
Nadia, I'm worried about you. When's the last time you saw Ali? 11 months ago.
Don't leave us.
I don't want to go back.
You are saving lives, Eli. Remember that.
When I first became Kamel, it was just an act.
You mumble in your sleep. You sometimes shout out names.
Those nightmares that she was talking about, they're not even mine, they're Kamel's.
Let's have an open, honest conversation on what my husband does.
Thinking of the clothes, he doesn't work anymore. I can't put him away.
Kamel isn't real. That life isn't real. You are Eli Cohen. You need to remember that.
It's a bit late for that.
So as early as 1951, and remember he was still in Egypt, he was arrested there for his Zionist activity, and the arrest did not stop him. Throughout the 1950s, Eli took part in Israeli operations in Egypt to smuggle Egyptian Jews fleeing rising anti-Semitism into the Jewish state, namely Operation Goshen, which smuggled in 10,000 Jews. He would raise funds in order to purchase from the local Arabs ammunition and guns stolen from the British. The British had a strong army presence in Egypt at the time. Although it was never proven, Eli may have been part of the sleeper cell of Egyptian Jews that was broken up as a result of the Lavon affair, also known as the unfortunate business, Esek Habish in Hebrew, or Operation Susanna, and this took place in 1954. It was the Israeli government's plan to carry out false flag attacks against Western and Egyptian institutions and blame them on the Muslim Brotherhood. As it turned out, the bombs failed to detonate. 2 members of the cell committed suicide, and 2 operatives, Moshe Marzouk and Shmuel Azar, who you see on the screen, were tried, convicted, and executed by Egypt. Eli was supposed to have sublet a flat to the suspects, destroyed secret documents, and hidden a revolver, but nothing was ever found to incriminate him. In 1955, he traveled to Israel for a brief espionage training course and returned to Egypt. In 1957, along with 25,000 other Jews, Eli Cohen was forced to leave Egypt in the wake of the Suez Crisis. The IDF recruited him, and he became a counterintelligence analyst and translator. His work bored him, and he attempted to join Mossad, but was offended when Mossad rejected him. He resigned from military counterintelligence. For the next 2 years, he worked as a filing clerk in a Tel Aviv insurance office. He met Nadia Majald, who was literally the girl next door. She was 11 years younger than him. It was love at first sight. In a later interview, Nadia said, "I saw a modest young man. He did not care about money or wealth. I felt he was something exceptional. He was a small talker, but a great doer. He was very clever. He was a diplomat. He knew when to speak and when to be silent. I was happy. He was my support." Nadia's family was from Iraq. They were secular and much better off than Eli's family, employing a gardener and a nanny. But like 90% of the Iraqi Jewish community, they left everything behind and came to a tent camp in Israel. There they lived for 6 years. But Nadia was quoted as saying, "The joy in our hearts was great because it was our state." Interestingly enough, Nadia's brother, that's Eli's brother-in-law, was Sami Michael. Michael became a prize-winning author. He died in April 2024, aged 97. He published 11 novels and 3 non-fiction books. In Israel, he was a national treasure. Back in Iraq, Mikhail was a member of the Communist Party. He always considered himself a man of the left, striving for dialogue and coexistence between Jews and Arabs, while Eli was a passionate, patriotic Zionist. Apparently, Mikhail was also approached by Mossad in the 1950s to become a spy. And apparently he did consider the possibility seriously, but rejected the idea out of hand when the Mossad suggested he go back to Iraq as a spy. So Jews like Eli Cohen from Arab countries were the nucleus of the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency. In his book, Spies of No Country, the Israeli author and journalist, Matti Friedman, describes the Arab section, which was conceived during World War II. It consisted of Jews, sorry about this. Yeah, there we go. It consisted of Jews native to the Middle East who could thus easily assume Arab identities. And that work is probably mainly done nowadays by Arabs and Iranians. And these are Eli and Nadia's children with some other children from the family. By the time Eli Cohen was recruited, Mossad had developed an impressive level of sophistication. Cover stories were constructed that necessitated months of training, learning Morse code and map reading, and the use of foreign languages. The Mossad recruited Cohen because it was looking for an intelligence officer to infiltrate the Syrian government. Mir Amit, the Director General of Mossad, was looking through the agency files of rejected candidates. For 2 weeks, Eli was put under surveillance and was judged suitable for recruitment and training. He did a series of sports tests, medical checkups, and exercises designed to test his endurance. He soon impressed his handlers with his photographic memory. His performance was rated outstanding. He was told not to say a word about his new role, even to his wife, Nadia recalls that she was 24 when he left her for the first time with her 4-month-old baby, Sophie. He used to write letters as if he was in Europe. When he came back, Sophie was over a year old. He was different, Nadia said. He had gained 4 kilos, had grown a Turkish moustache. His training involved his changing his dialect from Egyptian to Syrian. So he used to converse with his grandmother, Sophia, who was born in Syria. A stranger from Mossad would come to the house to teach him Islamic prayers. Eli Cohen was given a false identity as a Syrian businessman, Kamal Amin Tabet. He was returning to the country after living in Argentina. To establish his cover, Eli moved to Buenos Aires in 1961. There he mingled with the Arab community, letting it be known that he had large amounts of money to put at the disposal of the nationalist Syrian Ba'ath Party. At this time, the Ba'ath Party was illegal in Syria. Eli moved to Damascus in February 1962, and this photo was taken from his flat in Damascus. Mossad intended him to build relations with high-ranking Syrian politicians, military officials, public figures, and the diplomatic community. Eli continued his social life as he had in Argentina. He spent time listening to gossip in cafes. He held parties at home for Syrian ministers and businessmen. He dispensed free-flowing alcohol and prostitutes. The Netflix series shows him as a womanizer and bon viveur, and even suggests that he had affairs with other women, a fact strenuously denied by his wife, Nadia. He would pretend to be drunk to encourage conversations. He lent money to officials and dispensed advice. Now, Syria had been in an unpopular union with Egypt. Syria was the junior partner. The Nationalist Ba'ath Party, which had 50,000 members, staged a coup in March 1963. Tanks and troops filled the streets. Amin al-Hafiz, not to be confused with Hafiz al-Assad, who was a later president and leader of the Ba'ath Party. He actually took over in 1971. So this one was General Amin al-Hafiz. Eli had befriended him when he was military attaché in Argentina, and he made a fiery speech once the coup had taken place, denouncing the Egyptians and praising the Ba'ath. And he was named president, and all the best friends of Kamal Amin Tabet became ministers and leaders. A magnificent party was thrown for all the regime's supporters by, guess who? Kamal Amin Tabet. So Syria was then a haven for ex-Nazis. The most famous was Alois Brunner. The investigative writer Ronen Bergman claims that Eli located Alois Brunner, who was known as the right-hand man of the architect of the final solution, Adolf Eichmann. And an Israeli intelligence unit later sent letter bombs to Brunner. One evening in 1962, as Eli was leaning over his transmitter, he received an urgent directive from Israel to locate the war criminal Franz Reidemacher, who was hiding in Syria under the assumed name John Rosalie. Eli found out Rosalie's address and paid a contract killer $1,000 to have him eliminated. The plan did not work, obviously, as he died in 1973. In another version of events, Eli Cohen delivered a letter bomb to him in a failed assassination attempt. One of Eli's greatest exploits was to alert Israel about the Syrian plan to divert the headwaters of the River Jordan and prevent two of them, the Habani and Banyas sources, from flowing into the Sea of Galilee. This was an existential threat, as it would have cut off Israel's water supply. Eli found out about the Arab League plan after meeting Mohammed bin Laden, who is actually the father of Osama bin Laden of Al-Qaeda fame. Bin Laden, the father, was the owner of a large building concern who had been hired to execute the project. In what was known as the War over Water, on the 13th of November 1964, Syrian positions opened fire on Israeli tractors and army patrols. A tank and heavy artillery force returned fire, destroyed Syrian tanks and earth-moving equipment. The attack by Israel caused the entire deviation project to be postponed. But Eli's most famous achievement was to glean intelligence on the Syrian fortifications on the Golan Heights. Soldiers could take pot shots on the kibbutzim in the valley below. Eli became a close friend of the unit commander in the area and the only civilian permitted to circulate without restriction on the Great Ridge. And you see him in this picture, I think, on the far left. He found out the Syrian attack and defense plans, where the arms were stored, the fortifications, and facts and figures about the strength of the force. He gave the local commanders presents and entertained them in his home at all hours. But the achievement that Eli is best known for may have been the stuff of legend. There is a widely believed story that he feigned sympathy for the soldiers exposed to the sun on the Golan Heights and had eucalyptus trees planted at every gun emplacement to provide shade. The IDF were alleged to have used the trees as target markers during the Six-Day War in 1967, which enabled Israel to capture the Golan Heights in just 2 days. But the story was never confirmed. He also learnt of a secret plan to create 3 successive lines of bunkers and mortars. The intelligence that Eli gathered was an important factor in Israel's victory in the Six-Day War. And here you see that scene in the film The Impossible Spy, where Eli is briefing the Mossad operatives about the gun emplacements on the Golan Heights. His information allowed Israel to prepare for a surprise attack and to neutralize Syria's military capabilities. His intelligence even led to the successful Israeli attack on the Syrian military's radar system during the Six-Day War in 1967. But back in 1964, he had a narrow escape. A friend called Zahir al-Din passed through his house and flopped on his bed. Eli hurried into the bedroom, shaking. On the dresser near the bed were a few code papers. He dismissed them as crosswords. Despite the fact his cover was nearly blown, Israeli intelligence asked him to return to Syria one more time. In The Impossible Spy, the Mossad asked him not to go back to Syria, but in the Netflix series, it is Eli who wants to go back. He has taken on the personality of Kamal Amin Tabet. According to Nadia, Mossad forced him to go back one last time. They were dazzled by the prospect that he might become a minister. Nadia had a premonition that she would never see him again. Before leaving, Eli assured Nadia that it would be his last trip and they would be a family again. The Syrians had already had their suspicions that a high-level spy was among them. In January 1965, Syrian officials, assisted by Soviet experts with Russian-made tracking equipment, successfully detected radio transmissions and located Eli's transmitter. They broke into Eli's apartment and claimed to have caught him red-handed in the middle of a transmission to Israel. One of the Syrian officers was Ahmed Swidani, who had never liked Eli. He was the head of intelligence and counter-espionage. He snatched the radio out of Eli's hand and smiled. "So we've finally caught up with you." Eli tried in vain to say he was an Arab immigrant from Argentina. Once the news of his capture got out, Israel and Belgium, Canada and France appealed to Syria not to execute Eli. Even the Pope tried to intercede. The campaign for clemency was led by Nadia and a human rights lawyer. But the Syrians were too angry and embarrassed by the whole fiasco, and they showed no mercy. Eli was found guilty of espionage by a military tribunal and sentenced to death. The investigative reporter Ronen Bergman was convinced that Eli was tortured. His sunken eyes, as you can see in the photo, bore witness to it. His captors had torn out his fingernails and applied electrodes to his sexual organs. The man who recruited and trained Eli, Gedalia Halaf, told Bergman, "I looked at him, at my Eli on Syrian TV, and I saw in his face the diabolical torments he had undergone. I didn't know what to do with myself. I wanted to scream." Eli Cohen wrote his final letter to Nadia on the 15th of May, 1965. "I am begging you, Nadia, not to spend your time weeping about something already past. Concentrate on yourself, looking forward to a better future." His final wish was to see a rabbi, and Nissim Indibo, the chief rabbi of Syria, went with him in the truck to the gallows. Eli Cohen was publicly hanged in Marjeh Square, Damascus, on the 18th of May, 1965. Syria refused to return Eli's body to his family in Israel. His wife Nadia wrote to Al-Hafiz in November 1965 asking for his forgiveness and requesting Eli's remains. It is claimed that the Syrians buried him 3 times to stop the Israelis from taking back the remains to Israel. Eli's brothers Abraham and Maurice led a campaign to return his remains. Maurice died in 2006 and Nadia took over. In 2018, the press announced that Eli's watch had been retrieved from Syria. It was up for sale and Mossad managed to capture it. It was presented to Eli's family and is now on display at Mossad's HQ. These were their children, Sophie, Irit, and Shai, together with Nadia, who never remarried. For 30 years, she refused to talk about Eli. Did she know that her husband was a spy? I think she had a good idea. She opened letters for Mossad she was not meant to open and realized that her husband was not too far away from home. I am proud of what he did, but I never felt that I had a husband, she said. The children even never felt they had a father. When Eli left home for the last time, her son Shai was only 3 weeks old. Although she was married to him only for 4 years, a time interrupted by frequent periods when he was away on his secret mission, her whole life has revolved round him. Now the campaign to have his body returned to Israel has been led by their eldest daughter, Sophie. Nadia is now into her 80s. Cohen has become a national hero. His contributions to Israel's security were recognized posthumously by the Israeli government, and he was awarded the Medal of Distinguished Service, Israel's second highest honor, and his name was added to the list of fallen soldiers at the Mount Herzl Military Cemetery in Jerusalem. Many streets and neighborhoods in Israel have been named after him, and the settlement of Eliad on the Golan is named after him. And this is Nadia with a picture taken during those 4 years when they were married. There is a nature trail in the Golan Heights with various sculptures as signposts. Interestingly, and this is the watch on the left-hand side, and the sculptures on the nature trail. Interestingly enough, his story spread to the Arab world. When Nadia gave an interview to the Babylonian Jewry Heritage Center near Tel Aviv, its manager, Lily Shaw, was excited to tell Nadia that she and her family, then a remnant of a tiny repressed Jewish community living in Iraq in the 1960s, had read an Arabic version of the book on Eli Cohen in Baghdad. The book passed secretly from house to house with utmost caution, she told Nadia. If they had been caught with it, members of the family would immediately have been led to the gallows. What courage we had then! With what thirst and enthusiasm Jews read the book. They did so at great speed because everyone was queuing up to read the book. I brimmed with pride and respect discussing the story with other Jews. Even though I was a young girl, everything remained etched in my memory. So an important source for this lecture was this book, Our Man in Damascus, by Eli Ben Hanan. I found it free to download on the internet. The person who uploaded it was an Arab. He didn't do it out of admiration to show off Eli's exploits, but I quote, understand the Jewish mentality and their stubbornness. He wanted the book to help him to learn English and was happy to know that some people in the Arab world managed to capture this foolish spy. So I'll just stop my share here. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them. So I think I answered that question, Shelley, about did Nadia know that he was a spy? Yes, she did know he was a spy. And actually, he actually told them that he was an economic spy. And he had a conversation with Sami Mikhail, Nadia's brother, and Sami Mikhail guessed that he was a proper spy, not just an economic spy. So I think it was an open secret in the family. Arlene Goldberg, I remember being told that Eli Cohen was discovered by Syria due to reports from neighbors that there was interference with their television. Is there any truth to this? Could well have been the case, because what happened was the Syrians stopped all radio transmissions in the area that they thought the spy was operating in, and therefore his was the only transmitter that was working there. So it probably did interfere with their television. Was there ever an inquiry by Mossad on the Israeli government into whether somebody was at fault for sending him back to Syria on that last mission? No, there wasn't. I think it was still considered his responsibility, that he agreed to go back, basically. I think he was possibly intoxicated with the idea that he had reached the very highest, ranks of the Syrian government. I think, in a way, he felt that he had to finish the mission. So what do I feel was his legacy? I think it was a story of great heroism, which has, inspired a lot of Israeli children. He is the sort of the symbol of Israeli patriotism, loyalty to the country, sacrifice for the country. I think Israeli school children are always taught his story. We demonstrated in Manchester against his hanging, Gita. Wow. Well, I know Manchester's always been very active and very wonderful. The Jews in Manchester, that is. Isn't there a museum in Herzliya dedicated to Eli Cohen? I don't know about that. I think there is a new museum dedicated to the Mossad. I'm not sure whether it's solely about Eli Cohen. Is that it? Are there any more questions? How did his story come out? How did his story come out? Well, it wasn't very easy to ignore, since his trial was actually broadcast on television, and people in Israel were glued to their televisions to see what would happen. His body was print, the picture of his body hanging in Marji Square in Damascus was all over the newspapers. There was international pressure for him not to be executed. I think it was very, very difficult to actually suppress this story. And thank you, those of you who are thanking me. Are there attempts to obtain his remains? Yes, I think those attempts have never stopped, actually. And his daughter Sophie is still going around the world trying to campaign for the remains to be returned. I think she was trying to put pressure on the UAE, to put pressure on Syria. Well, I hope that his remains will one day be returned to Israel. But as things stands, Stan, I don't think they will be, because Syria is basically at war with Israel. I don't see it happening in any time in the future. Thank you, all those who are thanking me. Is that it, Hannah?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And thanks to everyone who was listening. Bye for now.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks.